Can you believe it's nearly been a month, 27 days to be precise, and counting? The Russia-Ukraine crisis continues to be as dangerous and complicated as the day it began, February the 23rd night. Later this week, US President Joe Biden heads to Poland. The US President will not be going to Ukraine despite multiple requests from that country. The leadership has been telling Biden, if you're coming to Poland, why can't you come to Ukraine as well? Zelensky is disenchanted with the NATO and the West, and Putin, having miscalculated the resistance and bleeding under sanctions, is showing no signs yet of backing down. So what happens next? What is Putin's next step action plan to dominate Ukraine? Gaurav Sawant in Poland and Geeta Mohan in Moscow bring you this report. He's about to mark a month of his invasion of Ukraine. He's about to mark a month of rapid-fire sanctions against Russia. And he's about to mark a month of warning the international community about World War III. In just hours from now, these three leaders will be on the same landmass. After his vice president failed to cut any ice in Poland last week, US President Biden will be in Ukraine's neighboring country this week. The visit comes amidst weeks of suspense over whether Ukraine's NATO neighbors will help stop Putin's war machine.
Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
Will you be meeting with him?
Now, in the Ukrainian land, our soldiers and officers are fighting for Russia, for a peaceful life, for the people of Donbass, to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine so that no anti-Russia that has been created by the West next to our borders didn't threaten us. With nuclear weapons as well, as it was happening recently, our people is proud of.
US President Joe Biden's visit to Poland comes at a time when Ukraine's President Zelensky has increasingly felt more disenchanted and betrayed by both the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization countries. And this disenchantment he has openly expressed in more ways than one, and now on more occasions than one.
Зробити Україну, щоб стати членом НАТО, бути в безпеці, отримати гарантії безпеки. Ми чули відповідь. Рішення такого на столі поки що немає. І найближчим часом не буде. Як і крісла для нас за цим столом.
Between the belligerence of Putin and the self-righteous counterstrikes by Biden, Europe is taking on a terrifying post-war hue. Devastation in big cities, talk of battle in the air, nuclear forces on operational alert, night skies lit up by explosions, weapons by the ton flowing across international borders, and the hustle and bustle of superpower leaders with no real plan on stopping the actual violence. Can Biden provide clarity on what happens next? With Gaurav Sawant in Poland and Geeta Mohan in Moscow, Bureau Report, India Today. So that was Biden and Putin. What about Putin versus Zelensky? It's a war between nations, one army attacking and one defending. But beyond the sound and the fury of the heavy guns, the gore of this war that's totting up a victory in human bodies, there's a clash of personalities, very, very strong personalities. The other big front of this war, the fronts painstakingly created and maintained by individual leaders of this battle. The world too has aligned politically beyond the very, very articulate, strong personas of Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky.
One is a strong man. The other has become stronger by the day. The one has at his command one of the most powerful militaries that the world has ever known. The other has become the most powerful symbol of military resistance. One is likened to strong leaders going back over 100 years, whose actions destabilized Mother Russia. The other is also likened to wartime leaders of Europe going back nearly a century. The one is Vladimir Putin, the aggressor. The other is Volodymyr Zelensky, the defender. If only this were a computer game. But it is not, and lives are being lost at every instance. As one man pushes his army to invade, destroy, and kill. And the other man pushes back. Pushes back against the invader. Pushes the conscience of the world to help him keep alive the freedom of choice. If only this were history from the past. If only this were not terrible history in the making.
Такого единения у нас давно не было.
Vladimir Putin, in the 22nd year of his power, is no longer an individual. He's a system. He's an order.
Когда поставили жесткий барьер на пути.
He's both an individual and a symbol for all that Russia has come to stand today. 146 million Russians do not matter. What matters is what Vladimir Putin decides. Putin is more than an individual. He has become synecdoche, a minuscule Russian who has made himself represent the whole of it. Volodymyr Zelensky, in his third year in office, is no longer the comedian he was. He has grown in importance far beyond the boundaries of his beleaguered country. Zelensky, in his military t-shirt, is a symbol too. Zelensky is resistance, a rallying call for 41 million Ukrainians. Zelensky too is a synecdoche, where the whole of Ukraine is represented in its one single minuscule part.
Very simple question. With nearly a month of this military operation, this invasion of Ukraine, the simple question is, what happens next? The world has run out of specific questions to ask because so many things have gone in directions that most people didn't predict. There was a sense that this would be a lightning operation. It hasn't turned out to be that. There was a sense that NATO would help Ukraine more directly. That hasn't happened. There was a sense that the United States would be able to dissuade Russia from this entire military operation through, sanction after vicious sanction. That hasn't happened. The number of military operations taking place within Ukraine haven't lessened in intensity. That was also something that was not foreseen. From a lightning war, it has become a grinding war. That also has not been foreseen. So many things are dynamic right now, and we are already on the path to marking 1 month of the world's biggest conflict at this point of time. Joining me live from Warsaw, Poland, is India Today's Gaurav Sawant. Gaurav is back on the front lines. He's just landed a couple of hours ago in Poland. He will be crossing the border into Ukraine very, very shortly. Live with me from Moscow this evening is Russian journalist from Sputnik News, Tatiana Kukareva. Thank you very much to the both of you. Good to see you both. Gaurav, quickly coming to you first. The Ukrainian president, Gaurav, has sent out another message saying, I'm ready for talks with Putin without any kind of format, without any kind of, preconditions of any kind. You can choose the format. You've got Biden, who's landing in Warsaw, where you are right now, in just a couple of days from now. so many big, high-level superpower movements going on, but still so little, clarity on what the next steps are going to be, Gaurav.
Shiv, the world is clearly on edge because 27 days into these operations, Russian attacks are only intensifying, and the kind of weapons that Russia is using now is a very clear indication that Russia is going to move in, with its big weapons for the removal of President Zelensky. And his frustration, President Zelensky's frustration very clearly shows he's getting weapons from NATO, yes. He's getting financial support, yes. But how long? He's withstood the Russian assault for 27 days and counting. But for how long? Half his country is battered. There are millions of refugees where we are in Poland right now. More than 2 million Ukrainians have crossed over into Poland. And when US President Joe Biden arrives here and meets President Duda here, what's his big focus? His focus is not as much military hardware to Ukraine, which of course is coming almost every day. His big focus is, one, reassure Poland that Poland's interests are protected, that NATO countries stand together, and he is likely to visit a refugee camp here, interact with the people of Ukraine in that refugee camp, and reassure them that humanitarian assistance will come. But will humanitarian assistance and the Javelin missiles alone save Ukraine from Russia, given the fact that Russia now intends, from what we hear, intensifying its operations, remains the big question. President Zelensky's frustration, he's almost, in a way, now standing alone and isolated.
Standing alone and isolated, but the intensity of the actual military operation not going down even a little bit. Tatiana, what do you think about what President Zelensky of Ukraine has said? That, he's been saying this for the last few days, that, there has to be a face-to-face meeting between himself and the Russian president. Today he says he's ready for, talks in any format without any conditions between himself and Putin. Is that something you see happening in the current circumstances or in the foreseeable future?
Good day to you, Shiv, as well. Very happy to be on the broadcast. Well, we have to look at the facts here because, again, as a journalist, that there is a very big difference between something that is being said on national television and then you do realize that, to request a meeting, there are specific protocols, and that's not by addressing the Ukrainian nation on Ukrainian national TV. So I'm pretty sure that Vladimir Zelensky, although he is a very good, I listened to the broadcast, you're saying, your journalist is saying that he's not a comedian he once was. He's not a comedian, but he's a very good actor. And he has been perfecting that skill to an incredible level because every single person that is at least a little bit in touch with politics and knows how this functions knows that you don't request a meeting with another head of state by declaring something to your people. That is being done purely for that people. So he's talking to a specific audience. He's also talking to the West as well. He's portraying a very specific image. In the meantime, the situation hasn't changed really since day one. He was always alone in this. The only problem is that he was kind of making it seem like I'm very far from thinking that, that he didn't realize that NATO and the US are not going to involve themselves in something that could potentially end up in the destruction of the world.
Right.
Meaning a nuclear conflict. So he was always alone in this. And the problem with the media coverage specifically of this whole conflict is the fact that somehow we're all buying so much into the narrative that President Zelensky is selling. And the fact that everybody's buying into it so much just proves my point. He's a very good actor. He's been so good at it. Whether he wants a meeting with President Putin for real or not, unfortunately, that's down to the fact whether he's respecting and whether he's demanding this or asking for this meeting more likely through the proper channels or not.
Okay, we don't know that yet because he's only said that in a video that he's put out in public. We don't know if those are happening in their channels. We're gonna have a voice from Ukraine as well in just a moment from now. Also welcoming onto this discussion, we have Irfan Nuruddin. He's Senior Director at the South Asia Center in the Atlantic Council. He joins us live from Washington. And we also have Jonathan Wachtel. He's a Global Affairs Analyst and former advisor at the U.S. mission to the United Nations in New York. Welcome, gentlemen, to you both. Irfan, if I could come to you first. President Biden will be in Poland in a couple of days from now. The Ukrainian leadership has been wondering why the U.S. president, who's going to be coming all the way down to Poland, doesn't, make a stop also in Ukraine. That may have a more direct answer. But what do you think he's going to be able to achieve in Poland?
His goals are to reassure the NATO alliance, and Poland is right on the front edge of that, that the U.S. commitment to NATO remains absolute. At the end of the day, while the tragedy that's unfolding in the Ukraine is of worldwide attention, the obligations to defend Ukraine against Russian aggression did not fall on NATO. There might be a moral obligation, but there is no legal or alliance obligation. There is, on the other hand, such an obligation to Poland. Poland's also on the front lines of this incredible humanitarian tragedy in terms of the refugee crisis. And I think President Biden would seek to assure his colleagues in Poland that their effort is appreciated over here. So I think that's what it is. Symbolically, it's a very powerful visit. It suggests that the president is willing to put his personal capital on stake in terms of going to the region at a time when U.S.-European collaboration is as strong as it's been in many years. So I think that's really what it is. It's symbolic, but it's also substantive in reassuring anyone who might wonder whether or not NATO is intact, that in fact NATO for right now is very much intact.
But how substantive is it going to be vis-a-vis Ukraine's expectations? Because with each passing day, the damage is increasing. There's a time that's ticking. There's a clock that's ticking in Ukraine. So, there's a time for symbols, but there's also a great deal of bewilderment about what that substantive delivery is actually going to be. Jonathan, what do you think? Do you think it's always tempting for us journalists to, wonder whether there are going to be any big takeaways from such, such summits and such meetings. But we do know that there's a lot going on with NATO right now. What do you think President Biden will probably achieve? Of course, the symbolism is understood, but everybody's wondering about whether there's going to be a big takeaway.
Yeah, there has to be a huge takeaway this time. If there's not a unified stance between the Europeans and the United States, honestly speaking, I think democratic principles around the world are going to suffer, including India, which has a very interesting position, to say the least, in terms of this conflict and taking on fossil fuels from Russia in the midst of this crisis, especially in India's position in the world as literally the largest democracy in the world. So hopefully India will join in trying to contain what is essentially a terribly aggressive move by Vladimir Putin to try to seize as much territory of a neighboring sovereign state. I was in the Ukraine in the early 90s, actually working as a journalist. I was based in Moscow and covered the collapse of the Soviet Union and the emergence of the various independent republics that came out of that. And at the time, the document that was signed among the nuclear powers of the world, at that time, India also was a nuclear power, but wasn't a signatory of this particular document that was signed in Budapest.
Yes.
Enshrined a sense in which Ukraine's sovereignty would be recognized by Russia. It's in the letter of the agreement, and that England, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States would defend Ukraine, not militarily, but geopolitically, if there would be any sort of development as we're seeing unfold today. So really, President Biden needs to leave the meeting with NATO members with assurances for all, including the United States, and signaling to other nations around the world, democratic nations, this issue, this problem, this crisis, which was manufactured by aggression from Moscow, needs to stop, and we need to go back to some sort of not status quo, but a world reality in which this type of aggression cannot be tolerated.
Okay. Tatiana, would you like to respond to what Jonathan said, and also your views on what on what President Biden's visit is all about and how you're seeing it from Moscow?
Oh, I love this with great pleasure, because this type of aggression is not tolerated unless it comes from the US, and then it can do whatever it wants. Look, the situation is very simple. American president pumped Ukraine full of weapons and full of money, and literally made everything possible for the situation to unfold exactly like it has been unfolding for the last 3 weeks. In the meantime, he's going to Poland to, as my American counterparts are saying, to make sure that NATO countries understand that their interests are being respected. But that's not the case, though, is it? Poland, which just started to get its unemployment rates down last year, is going to be in such a great mess after this. Of course, NATO is a military alliance, and obviously we're not even talking about the fact that, that something can be done in this respect. As previously noticed, Ukraine doesn't fall under NATO jurisdiction, and nothing is and has ever been threatening Poland or the Baltic states. It has not been the case. It was, it was repeated and reiterated. Also, they're full of American soldiers. So again, not under threat. The threat here is economical and social, because right now Europe is facing round 2 of what happened after the Chechen wars, when the European nations first offered asylum to terrorists that were running away from Chechnya. And right now, they're going to be offering asylum to Nazis that are running from Ukraine. Unfortunately, they're going to feel the repercussions of such decisions years after, as was the case with the incredible situation with the mafia in France, the Chechen mafia, that proved to be very, very difficult to handle. But they were refugees at the time. So Joe Biden is going to Poland on a completely meaningless visit to just make sure that he's saying that Poland is protected. Nothing was ever threatening Poland. The threat to Poland right now is the refugee crisis. That is going to be devastating to Europe. That Joe Biden made sure that Europe also refuses Russian energy.
Okay.
Poland, that is hugely dependent on the supplies of Russian gas, it's going to be facing economic troubles and social troubles, is going to be flooded by refugees. It's not going to have enough energy
so this
for
is
people to
it's a
warm
crisis.
their homes.
It's a crisis of the West's doing, basically, is what Tatiana says. Jonathan, quick response, and I'll get Irfan also in to respond.
That was a really odd series of points that were just thrown out there. I don't agree with just about everything that she said. What I do agree with is that Ukrainian citizens are suffering a bombardment that they didn't ask for. The United States doesn't want war. Why would we want war in Europe? Why would we even want this? Why did these European nations decide to become NATO members? Why is Finland now considering becoming a NATO member? Why is Sweden now considering becoming a NATO member? Because currently, unfortunately, and I happen to adore the Russian people. I spent time, many years in Russia. I have many friends and people I'm very concerned about. Now, right now, they're living under conditions in which they don't have freedom of expression in their own country, in which their opposition leaders are imprisoned, and in a situation in which there is unleashed the Russian military, which should be used in proper conduct, is being unleashed on a civilian population in a neighboring country. This is just, there's nothing else to argue about here. All you're talking about Chechens, and by the way, there have been a series of Chechens who have actually been fighting for the Kremlin in Ukraine. So I don't even understand what you were talking about there. So to be perfectly honest, The trip to NATO is extremely important. I wish we could turn the clocks back and not be in this ridiculous place that we're in now, which is a throwback to the Cold War, in fact, worse. Potentially, in which there was a time in which Russia was engaging with NATO in the early 90s and through the 90s, and then we had a guy named Vladimir Putin come to power, who has these aspirations to reconstitute the Soviet Union. Okay. That's what this is about.
Irfan, quick response from you, then I'm going to move to the next discussion point.
No, absolutely. I mean, everything that Mr. Wakhtil said is right. I mean, your previous commentator from Moscow, I have no idea what she had to say. But this whataboutism is not helpful to the Ukrainian people. It's not helpful to anyone. Russian aggression has been unilateral against a sovereign nation. The international community has made clear that this is a violation of international law that is well established for the last 80 years. Lots of countries are going to have to now face the fact that what Russia is doing is bombing an innocent people into submission. Yes, there won't be active military involvement on the part of NATO. To do so would be to trigger World War III. No one wants that. So our hearts bleed for the Ukrainian people, but I think the consequences for Russia in the long run are going to be quite devastating. These sanctions will bite. The Russian economy will suffer for a long time, and countries that choose to support Russia, as China might be thinking about doing, as India appears to be willing to do, will also have to wonder whether we'll find out in the long run whether or not those actions have consequences they're willing to bear. Okay. No one wins in all of this, least of all the Ukrainians.
Okay, but since everyone's having a go at India, I just want to say that India's foreign policy will be in India's interest. I mean, these are considered decisions that India takes, there's a history to some of these decisions. So, I know there are analysts out there who are taking a swing at India's decision to abstain. There are problems, and there is a slippery slope, especially given the many foreign policy decisions that have been taken in the last, decade and a half. But, these are considered decisions. It's not just, these are not banana republic foreign policy decisions that have been taken. But let's move to the possibility of an endgame. It's been a full month, of an operation. The world's been on edge, pretty literally, in terms of, the effects. The economic effects of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine are being felt everywhere in the world. They're certainly being felt here in India. They most certainly are being felt in Russia. Tatiana, what is the end game? Again, I don't want to make it a, I don't want to make it a broad question, but it's been a month in. Huge numbers of Russian forces in Ukraine right now. We've got a map of, the vast amounts of area that are now under Russian control. At least 3 cities at last count. Kiev is encircled. There are missiles still crashing into the capital. What is the end game? What is the end game? Just list out for me the things or the conditions that need to be met for this to end.
Shiv, well, first of all, I can't, it just cracks me up how, messages of coming from, Washington or people aligned with Washington turned out to be threats on Indian air, saying that India will pay the consequences. This is the basis of American policy. You do it our way or it's the highway, basically. And this is adorable coming from one country to another massive world superpower. Just amazes me every time. But the end game, to come to your question, it stays the same. The end game here is the destruction, the total annihilation of the Nazi formations. Unfortunately, the city of Mariupol has been somewhat of a stumbling block because, these are big cities. Kharkiv and Mariupol are big cities. And unfortunately, this particular city has been home to one of the most ruthless Nazi battalions that we've seen, starting from, 2014 when they first made appearances. And it takes time, in order to save the civilian population and not to bomb cities to the ground like, the US does it and every conflict it gets involved in. The Russian military has been doing everything possible in order to ensure the evacuation of civilians, but the Nazi formations have to be destroyed, or they have to, they have to be judged for what they've done. This has been the end game this whole time. It's just impossible for the population of the Russian-speaking population to continue suffering from the hands of these people. And it's a terrible thing that the rest of the population of Ukraine is continually brainwashed to think that, oh no, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. These symbols that resemble swastika, well, you know, there's just a slight resemblance. This is a terrible situation. You've seen the videos. You've seen, you know, Ukrainian soldiers putting pork grease on bullets and saying that these are aimed against the Muslim population of Russia, the Muslim fighters, which are Chechen fighters. You've seen the videos of torture chambers are being uncovered in the eastern Ukraine that were the training grounds for those Nazi formations. I know that they're not showing them to the US citizens, but I'm pretty sure that you in India, you're following this conflict much more closely and with much more attention to detail. The end game remains the same. The Nazi regime has to go, and then when there's peace on the ground, when the population of Donbass is safe, we can talk.
Okay, we leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, Irfan, Tatiana and Jonathan, for joining me on this discussion. 27 days, no end in sight. What that end game is, we don't know. But like I said, with our reporters on the ground in every major part of Ukraine at this point of time, the military operations are only increasing in intensity. So whatever those takeaways are going to be in Warsaw a couple of days ago from now, when the US president arrives, not just the people of Ukraine, the world will actually be watching. Thank you very much for being with me here tonight on Newstrack. Well, one after the other, city after city in Ukraine has come under Russian assault. Mariupol, the third largest city, is now under siege and looks like its fall could be very imminent. Russia's military is now in the heart of the port city, but Ukraine, as always, continues to resist.
The besieged city of Mariupol, facing the worst of Russian onslaught. Pounded, pulverized and flattened. Paying with piles of bodies, including those of children, even toddlers. Strategically located in the middle of Putin's advancing army, next on Kremlin's radar to gain full control to the Sea of Azov. Fall of Mariupol will also help Putin extend dominance from already captured Crimea. Now, ominous signs show that the city may have been completely overrun by Russian troops. Satellite images show Russian military and tank columns forcing their way into heart of Mariupol. Russian military vehicles are also seen on the streets. Russian forces mounting final push to capture the city of Mariupol next. Russia has on multiple occasions warned Ukraine to surrender Mariupol, blaming Kyiv for the unparalleled humanitarian crisis unfolding in the port city. Ukraine has defiantly rejected the surrender diktat and blamed Russian war crimes.
Once ordinary Ukrainians and now fighters, men and women who stand up for our state, everywhere in the south, in the east, in the north, in the west and abroad. Stand up so that the enemy does not believe that this is a reality. But we will make them believe and make them remember that they are not welcome and they never will be.
Just 50 kilometers from Russian border, will Mariupol be next in line to fall to Russian onslaught? With Rajesh Pawar in the Ukraine war zone, Bureau Report, India Today.